Well, good morning. Man, I hope you have enjoyed singing some of these resurrection songs this morning because the resurrection is what we've been talking about in this series. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But I grew up in a church that's very similar to Grace Chapel. Very similar. We sang a lot of the same songs that we still sing now, but we also sang some songs that we don't sing now, some really, really old songs. And so what I'd like to do is actually survey the crowd this morning to find out where my people are, find out where the people who who sang the same songs that I sang growing up, all right? And so we're going to play a little game, all right? I have asked my friends on the praise team to sing the first part of a song that we sang in my church growing up, and they're going to stop at a part in this song, all right? And this is where you come in, all right? When you see these 3 yellow dots in the song, if you know the next line, I want you to sing it. All right? You with me? You feeling good? All right? Clear your throat, sit up straight. Hey, take a drink of water. We're going to do this, all right? Everybody's going to sing, right? If you know the song, I want you to sing it out. All right? Here we go. Praise team, are we ready?
Yep.
All right. Here we go.
He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within.
Look at that. Oh my goodness, that was awesome. So I was actually anticipating that you would not have had the same enthusiasm that you had, all right? So I want to do it one more time, and I want you to sing out this time with all the enthusiasm, I don't know how you say that word, enthusiasm that you can muster, all right? We're going to sing it through. You know it. They know it. Belt it out. Here we go.
He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart.
And I've got a little confession for you, because when I was 13 and I heard those words, there was a part of me that was sitting there looking around at the people next to me thinking, well, if Jesus lives in your heart, then you need to let Him out every now and then. And I'll tell you, there was another part of me that was sitting there listening and thinking, is this the best response that we've got? Is this the best response? Well, okay, I start with that because we're in the middle, really at the end of a series called The Answer with the Biggest Question. And we've been talking about the resurrection, and we've covered a lot of ground. And so I just want to pause and say, if you're coming and this is your first part in this series, it's kind of like walking in at the end of a movie here, all right? Because the last 2 weeks have been sequential. This whole series is sequential, and each week builds from one week to the next. And so I want to spend a few minutes this morning, about 8 to 10 minutes, longer than we would normally spend, reviewing where we've been, okay? And again, if this is your first week and you're just now coming into this and you feel like at any point in this next 8 to 10 minutes that you're lost, you've got to go back and listen to weeks 1 and week 2. All right? You with me? We promise you'll do that? Okay, good. Each week in this series, we've started with just some research. We've started with a problem that's going on in our country with the church at large, particularly with churches in the United States and really all around the world. And I've brought with me a slide each week, and I want to start there again in this review. Here we have America's changing religious landscape, and this shows all these different lines going all these different directions. Is an image of just the general population and how they identify what religion they feel that they are affiliated with. And there's 2 particular lines that I want to draw your attention to, and I've highlighted them here. There's the top red line, which is the evangelical line. And these are people who, like most of us in here, today would refer to ourselves, I mean, we take the Great Commission real seriously, and we refer to ourselves as disciples who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples, and on and on and on. You'll hear that kind of language here in this room and here at Grace Chapel a lot because we take that really seriously. The other line that I wanted to draw your attention to is this turquoise line down here on the bottom. The one that you see over the last 50 years has been kind of up and to the right, particularly since the 90s. And this is the demographic of our population, that when filling out a survey, they ask their question, what religion would you affiliate with? They scroll through all of the options and they get to the bottom option that says, none of the above. And they check that one. And this group has been growing very rapidly over the last 30 years, and particularly that I want to draw your attention to is in 2018, this demographic is now the largest of all of the other options out there. The only one that's not affiliated is now the largest, larger than even evangelicals. And what's really interesting to me about this is that the demographic of our population that's adding so much to this growth in this no religion trend line is actually the 18 to 29-year-old demographic, what we often refer to as the next generation. In the last couple weeks, I've brought with me some additional research. I brought something new today, but it's essentially making the same point as the last couple weeks, is that the demographic of the 18 to 29-year-olds, they are leaving the faith in that transitionary period where they're gaining independence and they're choosing to leave the faith. What's interesting, though, is when they're leaving. And so what I've got with me today is a report from the Public Religion Research Institute, published just less than 3 years ago. And what they wanted to find out was that of all the people who are leaving the faith, they wanted to find out, how old were you when you left? And so here on this left-hand column, we have the people that they surveyed, the demographics, 18 to 29-year-olds, the 30 to 49-year-olds, the 50 to 64-year-olds, and the 65 plus. You with me? All right, and across the top, we have when they actually checked of when they left. Was it under age 18? Did you leave the faith before you turned 18? Were you between 18 and 29 years of age when you left? Were you older than 30, or is it you do not remember? Here's what they found out. They found out that those who are in the 18 to 29-year-old actually left. 79% of them left before they were 18. And so that transitionary period of when they chose to leave the faith actually happened long before they left the home and long before they left the type of church that they were affiliated with. And what's fascinating is if you compare that with the 65 and older demographic, only 38% of them said they left before they were 18. So this transitionary period is happening a lot sooner than we thought. And it's caused some concern for me, and it's been a source of frustration as I have tried to struggle and figure out, okay, why did you leave? Well, thankfully, there's some really smart people out there who have actually asked that question. And what they have found out when they have asked, well, why did you leave? It's come in a lot of different forms. But it really all boils down to this. I just don't believe anymore. I just don't believe anymore. I mean, I grew up in church, or I grew up, in a religious household, that taught me the values, and they taught me the stories, and I went to all the BBSs, and I went on, the mission trips, and I did all the stuff. But you know what? I just got to a place where I just thought, I just don't believe anymore. And in this series, we've been talking about, well, how in the world did we get to this? How do we get to this response? And I think we can blame a lot of things. I think we could probably blame, the internet and technology just in general, social media, or just our culture and just how our culture's really changed. But you know what the real problem is? If you've been here the last couple of weeks, you know that the real problem is that the next generation is leaving the faith because the home and the church are leaving them unprepared. Unprepared, you might ask, to answer a question like this. Why do you believe what you believe? And here's the reality. Nobody in the world is really asking that question because they don't really care what your answer is. In fact, we're leaving them unprepared to answer that question that's actually happening on the inside. It's happening internally. When a statement like this is made, there's no evidence for the existence of God. And when a statement like that is made, it causes a little bit of, well, hang on, wait, what do I know? I mean, the Bible says this, and the Bible says that, my parents said this, and my preacher said that, and they're kind of reeling because we haven't prepared them. And so if you've missed anything so far, I just want you to know this, that if you're a believer in Jesus, you can respond to this question by saying, well, hang on. Well, there is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. There is that piece of evidence, because here's the reason that is the evidence that we hold out. If a man died and he came back to life, then there has to be a source of power outside our time and space that's strong enough to reach into our time and space and raise that person back to life. It's that simple, because there's nobody in our time and space that has the power to do that. So there has to be a source of power outside our time and space. Now, concerning this source of power, whether it's an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, all-loving and good God, well, if that person who died and came back to life had predicted their own death and resurrection and pulled it off, well, we should just listen to whatever that guy says. Right? And that's exactly the way that I view it, and that's the way many of you view it. It's like, well, man, he predicted his own death and resurrection and pulled it off. We should listen to whatever that guy says about that source of power and about everything else. But if you're going to make that kind of claim, if we're going to make that kind of claim, we've got to be able to back it up. We've got to be able to answer the question that comes with that. And this is where we're leaving them unprepared. The question that comes with that is, well, then how do you know that he lives? How do you know that he lives? You're making a claim that a man died and he came back to life. Prove it. How do you know that he lives? And where I have wanted to go, and where I hope that you have felt, and really what we've been trying to do is just start the conversation about helping the next generation answer that question. We must prepare the next generation with the understanding of why the resurrection is worth believing. Because guess what? They're already gone. They've already left. Sure, they may still be in your home, and they may still be coming to church and putting on a good face and doing all the activities and doing all the fun stuff, but the research shows that many of them are already gone. So we've got to go back and prepare them with the understanding of why the resurrection is worth believing. We've got to help them answer the biggest question: how then do you know that he lives? Now, in this series, 2 weeks ago and last week, we have tried to have a framework for thinking about responding to this question. And we've understood that, as Solomon says, the simple, they'll believe anything. But the prudent consider their steps. And so we want to be wise people. And we recognize that we live in a time where there are more sources generating information. And there are more channels for receiving and distributing that information than ever before in the history of the whole earth. And because of all that information, it can be overwhelming to be able to evaluate a claim about a man dying and coming back to life. Because it's the abundance of information that we're like, well, hang on, we've got to sort through some of this. And so we've needed that framework to be able to think about it. The simple believe anything, but the wise people create a mental line of defense. And so what we've talked about is part of this mental line of defense are three filters. Three filters of filtering through the information to determine whether it is worth believing. Three filters that wise people use. 2 weeks ago, we looked at the first filter, which was, are my sources reliable and do they care about me? Concerning the eyewitnesses who testified that Jesus had died on the cross, that he was buried, and that he came back to life, and that they saw all of that. Concerning, their claim, we evaluated, were they reliable and did they care about me? And what we found out in the first week of this series is that not only were they relying on they care about me, they were willing to endure torture and death so that the world would know the one who was resurrected. And we proceeded from there to say, well, hang on, a wise person, may be able to recognize what their motive is and realize that their motives were pure and like, no, I really believed it. I was willing to endure torture and death so that you would know. Well, that's really great. It seems like your motives are really pure. But I got to take it one step further, and I've got to ask, is it the best explanation? And so that's what we did last week. We evaluated, hey, this was the claim that was coming from these people who were eyewitnesses. And some of the skeptics who didn't believe it, but later became to believe it. And some of the enemies who were antagonistic about that claim, but also later came to believe it. And we had to consider, hang on. Of all the possibilities for what could have happened, because we know something happened. I mean, we're here today because something happened. In fact, 1/3 of the 7 billion people on the face of this earth believe that he was resurrected. So we know that something happened. But concerning all of the possibilities of what could have happened, was it the best explanation? Was it the most reasonable explanation? And if you weren't here last week, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it because we went through some of those possibilities of what else could have happened. What often the rest of the world says, hey, here's what could have happened. And we went through those possibilities, and what we discovered is that of all the possibilities for what could have happened, the resurrection is at least the best explanation. And so today, I want to talk briefly about this third filter that wise people use. And I actually say just briefly because the filter is, well, what if I'm wrong? What if I choose to believe in this Jesus that the disciples, the eyewitnesses, had held forth and said, he actually did die and come back to life? What if I chose to believe in that? And it turns out he didn't. Or what about on the other side? If I chose not to believe, and it turns out that he actually did come back to life, the Son of God, the King of the whole universe, and that all authority in heaven and on earth had actually passed to this resurrected person, and I chose not to believe. Here's the thing. I'm going to leave you hanging with that. Because in this life, you get to choose whether you want to believe in that or not. And individually, we have to assess this question, what if I'm wrong? And if you've never considered that, I would strongly encourage you to take some time to consider that. In fact, you can do that right now. Here's your invitation. If you've never considered that, you can actually just sit back and lean your head on the chair behind you, close your eyes, and think about that the rest of the time. You're excused from everything else that we have to say today. If you need to get up and go out and go consider that, you're welcome to go do that. But I beg you to consider it. Right now, what I'd like to do, though, is shift gears a little bit, okay? I want to shift gears, and I want to back up to the reason, to the response that people give when they're asked, why do you not believe anymore? Why have you left the faith? I want to back up to this, I just don't believe anymore response. The reason I want to do that is because I'm not convinced that most of the people who are giving this response have done the work of evaluating the claim of the resurrection like we have the last couple weeks. I'm not convinced they have. In fact, I'm not convinced that I would have either. Had I not been blessed to grow up in a church like Grace Chapel, and had I not been blessed to grow up in the family that I'd grown up in, who prepared me for understanding why the resurrection is worth believing. In fact, what I believe is underlying this response is actually, I just don't care anymore. You haven't given me a reason to care anymore. And the reason that I think this is the underlying response is actually because of a 17th century mathematician, philosopher guy, really smart. We've talked about him before. His name is Blaise Pascal. And this is actually what Pascal said about this response and what people base their beliefs on. This is what he says. He said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Now, what Pascal is saying, I don't think what he's saying is that they should base their beliefs on just whatever they find attractive, but simply that that's just what we do. And at a minimum, you can understand that if this is true, and that people really do base their beliefs on what they find attractive, not based on proof, well, we know that it would be much harder to connect with them if they don't care than if they just disagreed. It's much harder to connect with someone and to have a discussion about the resurrection or really even anything else if they don't care. If they disagree, however, we can talk all day long. In fact, I'm happy to talk with somebody that I disagree with because at least we both care about what we're talking about. But have you ever felt that, that frustration or some of that tension when you try to talk with someone about really anything and their response is, I don't care. And you're like, no, but this is why you should care. And they're like, I don't care. You're like, but have you considered this? And they're like, no, I haven't. I don't care. And so the question, and how I want to shift gears a little bit today, is to actually approach this by asking the question, so how do we connect with them when they don't care? How do we connect with them when they're no longer attracted? And we've got a couple options here. And thankfully, and when we consider some of these options, thankfully, I think we're all in agreement on eliminating one of the options, which is the option of trying to coax, incentivize, or force them to believe what we believe or do what we do or go where we go, right? I mean, if you look back through the pages of history and you consider the crusades that happened that took the approach, I am going to force you to believe what I believe and what I believe you should believe. And what a mess that turned out to be. So can we all just rule that one out real quick? The second option would be, hey, let's just get them all in the same room and let's just lecture them and let's just talk to them and let's just see, hey, this is why you should believe what we believe and, why we think you should believe it. But here's the thing. I have never gone to a lecture about something that I didn't care about. And so the lecture approach is not that it's really a bad one, but it's like, how are you going to get people to show up for it? Another option, which is really kind of often taken as this more spiritual approach, and I hope you're not offended by this, but this option is the, dear God, I don't really know what to do, so I'm handing it all back over to you, and I just know that you'll do with it what's best, and we just put it all in your hands, Lord, and just let us know if you need anything. And he's up there saying, hey, look, we had a partnership. And I wouldn't have ascended and, told you about all the power, all the authority that's been given to me in heaven and on earth. I wouldn't have told you about that and then given you the responsibility of going and making disciples of all nations if I wanted it all in my hands. And so the responsibility, again, is yours and it's mine. Well, the good news is that there is another option. The good news is that there is an option for connecting with those who have become disconnected. There is another option for engaging those who have become disengaged. And I kind of like to think of it more as us trying to re-enchant the disenchanted. There is another option. And the Apostle Paul actually talked about this option a few different times in the letters that he wrote to the churches that he was responsible for overseeing. In fact, one of the times that he talks about this issue and the more appropriate response is probably, I'm guessing it's probably either the third or fourth most well-known sections of our whole New Testament, right after like John 3:16 and the Lord's Prayer. And I believe that he took such great care in writing about this option because he had experienced it like we can't even begin to imagine. Because as many of you know, the Apostle Paul stepped onto the pages of history, not as Paul, the follower of Jesus and the church planter, but as Saul of Tarsus, who was known for the way that he engaged people to the point that he was willing to beat them, to imprison them, and even execute them. And it's because of that Saul of Tarsus, later Paul, had more regret and more shame and more guilt than everyone in this room combined. Because he had tried to engage people like some of the options that we had talked about just a minute ago. The lecturing, the forcing, the reinforcing, the coaxing. And he had taken them to their very extreme. Later, even after his conversion, after he became, in his words, a new creation, and changed his name from Saul to Paul, he talked about the limitations of even using the spiritual gifts that God gives us in trying to connect with and reach others. And he starts it by saying, "And now I will show you the most excellent way." And now I will show you the most excellent way. And so I want you to hear these words a little bit differently than you might have before. Because I bet some of you have heard these words 1,000 times or more in your life, or have read them 1,000 times or more. And so I would rather invite you to hear them through the hand of Paul with his pen at his desk, writing the most excellent way. This is what he says. "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, if I have the ability to communicate in every language in heaven and on earth, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I can communicate better than everyone on the face of the earth, in every language, on heaven and on earth, but don't have love, I'm an obnoxious clanging cymbal." He goes on, "If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all that I have to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing, and neither do they." And as if anticipating what his readers would have been asking next, well, hang on, Paul. What do you mean by love? He goes on to spell it out. He goes on to spell out the most excellent way. He says, "Love is patient." Patience is when you adjust your pace to their pace without getting too far ahead and without getting too far behind. He says, love is kind. Kindness is where you give of your strength without reminding them of their weakness. He says it does not envy and it does not boast. This is where Paul says you just sit in and you celebrate their accomplishments without reminding them of your own. He says it is not proud. This is when you know you're wrong and you go out of your way to admit it. I can remember a handful of times growing up, going to bed, as a child, going to bed. My dad comes in and he gets down on his knees next to my bed and he says, "Son, I was was talking with your mother earlier tonight, and I was disrespectful to her in our conversation. And I don't know if you heard it or if you were in the room or not, but I've apologized to her. And I just wanted to come and I wanted to apologize to you. And I wanted to apologize to your sister and your brothers as well. Because that's not the way I want to treat your mom. That's not the way I want to love your mom. And I certainly wouldn't want you to get the idea that when you grow up that you should talk to your wife that way. Do you know the kind of impact that has on a young boy? I'll tell you the kind of impact it had on me. Because I'm reminded every time in a discussion now with my wife of the way that I want to interact with her and the example that I want to set for my children. And I'm not perfect at it, but when I'm wrong, I'm much more inclined to go seek out my children and to say, I'm sorry. Love is not proud. It's not rude. This is where you realize that you need to stop talking for a minute about what you're interested in and start asking questions about what they're interested in. It's not self-seeking. This is when you work hard to find ways to serve other people without getting anything in return. You know those exchanges where you're like, well, if I do this, they'll probably do that. Love doesn't think like that. In fact, when it does think like that, it says, I'm not going to think like that because love is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. Do we even need to talk about this one? It keeps no record of wrongs. This is when you find yourself, when someone has repeated the same mistake over and over and over again, and you find yourself gladly forgiving them again anyway. Love does not delight in evil. This is when you stop laughing at that off-color joke that really isn't funny. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices in the truth. This is when you stop feeling good about even unintentionally pulling one over on someone. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And this is what we need to do, because this is where we've lost them. This is where we've not become attractive. And as if Paul is anticipating his readers' objection, saying, but yeah, Paul, but that's just a lot of really hard work. And I mean, how will we even know if it will work? How will we even know if we'll be able to connect with them again? He goes on to say, well, hey, love never fails. Love never fails to connect. Nothing connects better than a resurrected life. Nothing connects better than a resurrected life. And when you're engaging with the next generation, you've got to be able to show them your own resurrection. If you want to connect with the next generation, they need to see that Jesus is alive within you. Nothing is more attractive than a resurrected life. We've lost them because we're not attractive. But you know what's attractive? The resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus is the most attractive thing in the world. People who didn't even look anything like Jesus, they liked him. They followed him around because of the ways that he engaged them. They were so attracted to him because of the way that he engaged every single person. Nothing reveals the resurrection like seeing a resurrected life. But you know what I find is often the hardest thing? It's just in that moment where you get a little bit frustrated at the way that they're acting. You get a little bit frustrated the way the other person's engaging, and you want to just say, hey, come on, I just want you to see what I see. I just want you to do what I believe. I want you to believe what I believe. I see so much potential in you. Don't you see it? Have you ever felt that where you just see so much potential in someone and they don't see it and because they're attracted? Why are you attracted to that? Why are you attracted to that? And you're trying to engage them and you just don't know what to do and you don't know what to say. The next time that you're in that moment where you don't know what to do and you don't know what to say and you don't know how to connect and you don't know how to engage, I want you to pause and I want you to stop and I want you to think this. A resurrection reflection is the best connection. Reflecting the resurrection in your own life is the best way to connect with every single person that you come into contact with. Whenever you get in that moment where you're like, oh, but I've lost them already, and they've become, attracted to this and they become attracted to that and they're gone and I can't get them back and I'm frustrated because I just see so much potential. I just wish that they would just see what I see. You have to take a step back and say, a resurrection reflection is the best connection. How can I reflect the resurrection to them? How can I reflect my own resurrection to them right now? Can you imagine what that would be like for your children if every single person in their lives reflected the resurrection of Jesus to them? Can you imagine the kind of impact that would have on their lives? Can you imagine what that would do for our school teachers and our administrators and our principals if we all decided to reflect the resurrection of Jesus even when we disagree with them? Can you imagine if that was the kind of environment that we all went into where everyone was just reflecting the resurrection of Jesus? Can you imagine if you went to work tomorrow and you found that one person, that just gets on your nerves? Just that millennial that's just so annoying. Here's the thing I've learned about millennials, is that some of them are real people. And all of them have souls. Can you imagine if you sought them out and you said, I just want to reflect the resurrection. Lord, how can I reflect your resurrection, the resurrection that lives within me? How can I reflect that to them right now? Can you imagine what that would have done for you? If your mother had reflected that to you when you were younger, rather than finding all the little things wrong with you, and just trying to say, well, you should do this better and you should do that better, and instead tried to reflect the resurrection of Jesus to you. Can you imagine if you walked into an environment where your boss was not so micromanaging and, just breathing down your neck all the time and instead reflected the resurrection of Jesus to you and everyone around you? Can you imagine what that would do to the culture of your office? You think about all the different environments that you go in. And what would change if the resurrection of Jesus was actually what was put into practice by everyone? See, I believe that Jesus believed that was possible. And as frustrated as I am about losing the next generation, I just want us to start reflecting the resurrection of Jesus and see what that would do. I hope that we can agree on this, that we must prepare the next generation with the understanding of why the resurrection is worth believing. And it starts with you, and it starts with me, and it starts right now. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you so much for these last couple weeks. I thank you for this series and being able to start the conversation about really something that we haven't been doing, Lord. And I just thank you for the conviction in my own heart, and I hope that others have felt the same conviction in their own heart, that we've at least got to do something. I thank you for the evidence that is there for the resurrection, and that we can point to that, and that we can say, look, it's the best explanation of what happened and why the world changed and why the church exploded and how we arrived here today. But Lord, I just thank you even more for the resurrection of Jesus that wasn't just exclusive to him, but that's been passed down from generation to generation, and it's found its way in my heart and in the hearts of the people who are here today. And I pray that that reflection within us will be reflected out to the whole world, and that we'll connect with the next generation like never before. Jesus, it's in your name that we pray. Amen.